Good morning. To be the first speaker after a night like that is a rather thankless task. I thought maybe I should also begin with Je m'appelle Thierry Dupont. But then I would end up with a problem of sustainability myself. So I thought perhaps I should stop there. And I have to warn you that I'm not an expert on the subjects that you've been hearing so much of from knowledgeable experts. I personally tend to belong to the Elizabeth Taylor School of Environmental Expertise, which consists of understanding that the world is in the process of saying to Mother Nature what Elizabeth Taylor says to her husbands, "I shall not keep you long." Now that's why we should really all thank the Stordalen Foundation and the Stockholm Resilience Center for organizing this multidisciplinary forum with representatives from science, politics and business. I suppose I fit in the middle category because I do think this forum is particularly valuable as we're reaching the end of the Millennium Development Goals and moving to a post-2015 agenda. Now, the topic I was given by the organizers, how will business lead India's energy, water, and food security? In fact, the speech I would really have liked to have delivered is the one that Jonas Stora delivered yesterday so very well, about the huge challenges that politicians and the inadequacy of politicians mean the world is facing when it comes to tackling environmentalism. Gunhild and I were just talking last night briefly about how in all democracies, the politicians have to think in the short term. We can't think beyond the next election. And our voters, in any case, are only interested in what we can do for them now. So that any politician with a long-term vision is almost invariably confined to short-term thinking, because if he or she doesn't think in the short term and survive the next election, they won't be around to implement a long-term vision anyway. So that does have a serious implication. But maybe, Gunhild, we should do a separate session on that at a future EAT forum, and I will return instead to the topic that you gave me because it was so relevant for a country like India where 14 out of our 20 major river basins are severely stressed, where 100 million people have no access to safe drinking water, 400 million people are without access to reliable electricity, and an estimated 500 million face food security on a daily basis. The challenges are absolutely huge, and of course the opportunities are immense. As a former UN man, I'm inspired by Dag Hammarskjöld's famous advice that you should never calculate the height of a mountain before you climb it, because when you get to the top, you'll realize how low it really was. So we should take these huge challenges and go with them. But 18 minutes is what I've got. They're not sufficient to do justice to a discussion on such a vast and important topic. And food has already dominated this conference, rightly so. We've heard a lot about it, and we've eaten a lot of it. So what I'll try and do instead, for the sake of avoiding superficialities, is to spend more of my focus this morning on the question of water. That is, while touching upon food and energy, I think that's one area where perhaps I could make a specific set of references that might complement our discussion on food. After all, 70% of you and me is water. As W.H. Auden once said, thousands have lived without love, no one without water. So let's look at that perspective particularly, and to do so in Stockholm is particularly satisfying because this is the city where the foundations for modern environmentalism and sustainability were laid at the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in 1972. I'm reminded of the words of India's Prime Minister at that time, Indira Gandhi, addressing the conference said, and I quote, "Modern man must re-establish an unbroken link with nature and with life. He must learn again to invoke the energy of growing things and to recognize, as did the ancients in India centuries ago, that one can take from the earth and the atmosphere only so much as one puts back into them," unquote. 4 decades later, not only do we need to re-establish this link and find ways to live within the limits of ecology, but we must understand the deep-seated interconnections between the challenges and solutions for water, food, and energy security. For a country like India, of course, threats posed by a growing population, 1.2 billion and counting now, vulnerabilities to climate change, all of these demand immediate action. Now, the era for tackling these problems with a traditional approach or in silos is long gone. Take, for example, India's food security challenge. In the 60s and 70s, we had our green revolution. And the agricultural revolution was ushered in by public investments into hydroelectric power generation, canal networks, rural electrification for harnessing groundwater, and R&D in agriculture that produced the so-called miracle seeds. Now, while the subsequent decades have seen self-sufficiency in India's agricultural output, a better understanding of ecosystem services has highlighted the concerns of rapidly diminishing groundwater reserves. The large hydropower infrastructure that offered a renewable source of energy is now facing severe concerns of waterlogging, loss of habitat, silting in rivers, shifting rainfall patterns, and rising water demand. And even though in 2013-14, the last fiscal year, which is also the way we count these things, India recorded its highest agricultural output, it's widely agreed that with our growing population, India needs a second green revolution. This time, miracle seeds alone won't be enough. We'll need a much larger miracle, embracing water as well, in which businesses will have to play a role. Similarly, India's energy security challenges are huge. We import most of our energy needs. We have ambitious plans, such as setting up supercritical thermal power plants or tapping into nuclear energy. But these are also, first of all, these have various implications that we can debate somewhere else, but they're also contingent upon things like access to quality water. Achieving the government's goal of 100,000 megawatts of solar power by 2030 cannot come at the cost of PV manufacturing facilities dumping hazardous wastes into water bodies, into streams, into rivers, which is what's happening right now. Diverting India's natural gas, a clean bridge fuel for power generation, will have implications on the price of fertilizers and consequently, again, on access to food. I mean, clearly, as we heard yesterday, the interconnections of all of these are undeniable. And ensuring water, food, and energy security in India will require innovative, integrated, and interdisciplinary solutions. And here lies the immense opportunity for the business sector. The demand for solutions for sustainable energy, nutritious food, and water management will only increase. Companies working directly in these sectors must work towards developing innovative products and services for all sections of society, and as we say in India, starting at the bottom of the pyramid. One of our bigger companies, a big multinational, Tata's, for example, has come up with an indigenous innovation, a thing called the Tata Swatch, which is not a watch that the Swiss made, but is actually a low-cost alternative water filter for water purification that doesn't require any running water or electricity. It's made up basically of grain husks, scientifically selected and put inside, and you pour not clean water, 99% of impurities are removed through the husk and clean water comes out. And the entire unit, which is about this big, costs somewhere in the neighborhood of $20. So you're looking at low-cost solutions for genuine problems. I actually use one of these Swatch filters in my home in my constituency as well. With India home to 40% of the world's malnourished population, big food companies must also take on the challenge of providing micronutrients and vitamins to the bottom of the pyramid population by expanding their range of products. Iodized salt is something the government got into. There are other things that can be done. And there are various kinds of opportunities in India's growing economy for companies to create sustainable solutions for issues that are actually of material significance to their own business. For example, Indians are now using 1 billion mobile phones, and they all need charging, right? Now, couldn't mobile phone companies invest in India's market for renewable energy, for alternative energy, solar-powered mobile phone chargers? I don't know, the various kinds of things that require investment, but this would both improve national energy access while attracting new consumers to their products. Consumers are not currently connected to the electricity grid. So a business motive that would create or help create sustainable energy solutions as well. Now, the business sector as a whole will also mitigate major risks if it can complement the government's efforts in providing these prerequisites. With the International Labour Organization, the ILO, predicting that India will have 116 million working-age people by 2020, the country will continue to remain a big and growing market for several decades. After all, for businesses to thrive, the sector needs an able workforce that is not anxious about the basics of securing food, water, and energy. A society secure on these counts offers the ideal market and a strong customer base that are imperative for the sustainability of business itself. We shouldn't forget, in fact, I think one of the speakers yesterday reminded us too, that a few years ago, amongst the catalysts for the Arab Spring were unaffordable food prices and riots that broke out across many Arab countries over the scarcity of bread. Food security is fundamental to human security, and bluntly, there is no national security without human security. So businesses have an obvious interest in social stability. But energy, water, and food are also critical inputs for almost every industry. And therefore, the motivation for the judicious use of water, energy, and natural resources extend on a more mundane level to all types of businesses too. With regard to water, the Planning Commission of India has noted that by 2030, increasing industrialization and population growth could lead to 50% of India's water demand going unmet. Can you imagine that? 50%. Therefore, it's extremely important for industry in India to reduce its water footprint in terms of fresh water used and reduce the quantity of polluted wastewater that it releases untreated. One example of recent positive change comes from soft drink companies in India, which have been severely criticized. I don't know if Sunita Narayan is here, but she authored a very famous report attacking our Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola and so on for depleting groundwater resources, especially in agrarian areas. The report said more than that, but that's a key point. Now, in the face of intense criticism from local communities around their plants in India, they're attempting to remediate the impact of their large water demands through watershed development programs. This is new, and it's in response to the public criticism and attacks. Some of their initiatives have included promoting rainwater harvesting, introducing techniques like drip irrigation and micro-irrigation in communities around the plants, as well as amongst farmers supplying inputs to their businesses. Now, whether soft drinks largely devoid of nutritive value should even feature on the menu is a completely different issue, and I'm sure most of you at the forum have a view on that. But since water is a local issue, such initiatives are invaluable. Now, the companies are arguing, and I know people like Sunita are very skeptical about this, that therefore what they're doing is not only value neutral, but it's actually a positive plus, that they're giving more water back to the community than they're taking out of it. That is still contestable, and the data has to be properly analyzed. But it's interesting if major companies in all sectors, and not just beverages, can sign up to programs like there's a program called the CEO Water Mandate, which promotes regular water audits and corporate disclosure is required throughout their supply chains for what they're doing. Now, it's obvious that a tremendous amount still needs to be done to better manage water resources in India. As compared to a global average of 70%, 80% of India's water use is for the purpose of agriculture. The World Bank reported in 2010 that more than 60% of irrigated agriculture and 85% of drinking water supplies in India depend on groundwater. A consequence of this practice is rapidly diminishing reserves, a decrease in the quality of water, and the need for more electricity to pump water from greater depths in the ground. So you're reducing the water table and plunging even deeper into the earth. This practice is so unsustainable that in the state of Punjab, which has been called the granary of India, the Earth Institute estimates that for every kilogram of food crops that Punjab grows, we spend 3 units of electricity. And as a result, our real cost of production of rice and wheat in these states is equal to, if not more than, the cost of production. And once you start looking at the economics of food production this way, it can be an extremely worrying and sobering set of figures. Now, of course, one of the reasons for the excessive dependence on groundwater in a land full of rivers and, of course, the monsoon rains is that close to 80% of sewage generated in India flows untreated into rivers, lakes, and ponds. And so we're destroying what nature has given us in terms of rivers, lakes, and ponds. And, of course, rainwater harvesting is not sufficiently well practiced. So when the monsoon comes, farmers enjoy the benefits. When the monsoon goes, there's no water left. And this is the cycle of droughts followed by floods and floods followed by droughts. Seems absurd decade after decade for centuries, but we haven't overcome this yet. The lack of access to clean water has severe implications on the availability of functional sanitation facilities and the health of vulnerable Indians, in particular women and children, as a result. So there's no question that more and more experts, as I said, I'm not one, stress that we need a paradigm shift in water management to avoid political and social instability, combining technical expertise, efficiency in operations, expertise in management, and the capacity to finance infrastructure. The business sector can facilitate that paradigm shift through a sort of public-private partnership model. The answer isn't offloading the problem to the private sector, but allowing the private sector to solve the problem creatively, build the capacity required to sustain solutions, and move to the next challenge. But this kind of participation demands a commitment to a long-term horizon and robust corporate ethics. This is where, of course, the leadership, corporate leadership, will have to rise to the call. I think the good news in India so far is that businesses seem to be responding. I had the privilege of being present at UN Secretary General Kofi Annan's historic call for a global compact in Davos in 1999 that first set the global tone for socially responsible business. And I've seen a growing commitment from the business sector in India to contribute value not just to shareholders, but also to other stakeholders across our wider society. But a lot more remains to be done. We in India, we've actually passed a Companies Act, a somewhat controversial one last year, 2013, that obliges corporations by law now to spend 2% of their gross profits on corporate social responsibility. Now, the idea was to enlist companies as partners in the quest for sustainable development solutions. I had reservations about it because the whole logic of CSR ought to be that it's voluntary. But anyway, that's again a separate debate we can have. But the point is that we, in any case, need to move beyond CSR from the companies sort of having a culture of doing the minimum good, or at least avoiding doing bad, to actually ensuring that the net effect of their work is good for society, net good. Corporate sustainability, in other words, is as important as corporate responsibility, something that values and contributes to the preservation of our ecological and social systems. So we, of course, acknowledge that the business sector has such a wealth of expertise, practical tools, resources to offer as a solution for development challenges. And one great example of this, coming back to food, is if businesses were able to invest systematically in modernizing India's food supply chains by bringing in, for example, sophisticated cold storage, IT-enabled inventory management, and streamlining transportation of food. Do you know that we actually don't have cold storage facilities for 90% of our perishable produce? 90%. And the other 10%, by the way, is basically cold storage for the purpose of potatoes to be converted to potato chips. I mean, it's sad that in a nation where so many still go to sleep hungry, we actually throw away more food every year than the entire continent of Australia grows. And we do that just because we can't transport it edibly to markets even within India. With 40% of India's fresh fruits and vegetables unable to make a journey from farm to fork, this is an excellent opportunity for businesses to come in, use environmentally sustainable technologies, solar power technologies, for example, in farms in areas where access to reliable electricity is still a challenge. My government tried to bring in foreign direct investment into this area, but the whole issue of food storage, distribution, and logistics, but which fell afoul of both our federal structure of governance and the political posturing of the erstwhile opposition party that as of yesterday finds itself as the government. And let's hope that they start singing a slightly different tune on some of these things when they're in power. Now, in addition to improving efficiencies, of course, the private sector also has to play a key part in promoting the right solutions by financing investments in renewable and low-carbon technologies. And this is something that is so obvious that I will notice that time is running out. I'm going to skip the details of this. But the important thing is that India's energy demand is estimated to grow by 132% in the next 2 decades. So we clearly need, at a time when 80% of our fossil fuel needs is coming from imports today, we need low-carbon technologies across the board. Buildings consume 30% of our electricity, and they're not sufficiently environmentally friendly. But the fact that 70% of the buildings that India will have in 2050 are yet to be built makes a proportionately small investment in solutions like rainwater harvesting, passive cooling, low-carbon materials in these new buildings a win-win situation. One more thing, of course, is that the businesses in India should do much more to collaborate with universities to finance research. You know, we've got 1/6 of the world's population, which should mean 17% of the world's brains, but we only seem to contribute 3.5% to global research output. And that's something where I think we can take a lot of lessons from Sweden, a country which has done remarkably well, a country of 10 million people, which has 42,000 patented innovations. Well done. We could learn from you. Finally, since the clock is ticking, I still remember seeing Bill Clinton yesterday that when he first made a nationwide speech, which was at the Democratic National Convention of 1988, he got the loudest applause when he said the word finally. So finally, I would just say that it's important to all stakeholders, particularly businesses, to understand that while we're looking to the future, these issues are very real and prominent even today. Government and public institutions are making efforts towards climate mitigation and adaptation, which feed into solutions for water, energy, and food security. But it's the characteristics of innovation, invention, and flexibility displayed across different types of businesses and business models that will add the crucial component of resilience. Now, in India, you can never go wrong by quoting Mahatma Gandhi. So here in Sweden, let me quote Dag Hammarskjöld instead, again. And he said, there is a point at which everything becomes simple and there is no longer any question of choice because all of you have staked, all that you have staked will be lost if you look back. Life's point of no return. Now, I remain hopeful that through dialogue such as the EAT Forum, we're successful in impressing upon wider society that when it comes to climate change, human dignity, and preserving our ecological wealth, our choices are, to use Hammarskjöld's word, simple. We have reached human civilization's point of no return. Thank you very much. I wish the forum all success.